Welcome to the What to Read Next podcast. This podcast is hosted by Laura Amin, a voracious reader of romance and young adult novels. In this podcast, Laura interviews fellow readers and authors and asks them for book recommendations of what we should read next. We hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the show, guys. So happy to have you back. Today's guest is one of my favorite young adult contemporary authors, Siobhan Vivian. Siobhan wrote The List, Burn for Burn trilogy with Jenny Han, and my first summer 2018 contemporary Stay Sweet. In this interview, we dive into her writing process, what it's like to be a co-author of a book with your best friend, and we finally dive into the Stay Sweet. I hope you enjoy this conversation, so let's just get to it. Hi, Siobhan. Welcome to What to Read Next podcast.
Hi, Laura. Thank you for having me.
So happy to have you here. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. I am a young adult author. I've been writing books for about 10 years now. This 2018 was my 10-year anniversary of selling my first book. Yeah. I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I also teach creative writing at the University of Pittsburgh, and I have a husband and 2 little daughters.
Oh, that's so amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty much the dream life.
Yeah, I can imagine. You get to teach, but you also get to write. You get to just be passionate. You have a great family.
Yeah. I feel lucky every day.
Oh, it's so good to hear. And it comes through in your work. So that's the beauty of it.
Thank you.
So I got a question about your writing style. So what inspired you to start writing? What was the inspiration to be an author?
Some people I think can look back on like when they were young and say, oh, I always wanted to be an author. I am not one of those people. I knew that I always wanted to entertain people. And I wasn't the best student in high school. So like the idea that I might one day become an author would have been like, and you might one day like step foot on the moon. It just felt like an impossibility. Mm-hmm. But, looking back, I realized how much sort of crafting story mattered to me in high school in the way of gossip, right? So like I love to gossip, and more than that, I love to sort of like tell people stories about other people. And so I would hear about something juicy or want to share something with somebody. And in the morning I would like tell somebody, and I would be consciously aware of like where they would laugh, where they looked bored, and then when I moved on to the next person, I would be making like little tweaks to the way I delivered the story. Just like kind of punching it up. And so, and that brought me like such joy. I love to entertain. I love to like capture people's attention. And I like to be sort of, I was almost like an orator of, capturing like an oral history of our high school. I think I was probably involved in some way in all the drama, at least, from a storytelling standpoint. But, it was like junior year when I took a creative writing class, and I took it just because I heard it was an easy A. Mm-hmm. And it was an easy A, but it was also like, revelatory for me. And for the first time, like school didn't feel like school. And I was getting praise from teachers, which was also like something new for me. And, my creative writing, the teacher who was in charge of the creative writing elective happened to be also the head of our high school English department. And he pulled me aside and said like, hey, you seem to really love this. I think you're really good at this. You can study writing in college. And at that point, I hadn't even really thought about college because, as I said, my grades were abysmal. And this teacher, Mr. Hurley, basically wrote a recommendation letter for me. I applied to one college that had a writing program, and he wrote me a letter saying, don't worry about her grades. Don't worry about her SATs. Like, she has talent. Take a chance on this person. And that was kind of how I came to writing.
That's amazing. I love that story. It's like, do you get inspired? You get to go through the motions, but then you have those moments of inspiration that just kind of like change your trajectory.
It really, really did. And honestly, I don't know where I would have fallen had it not been for that kind of lightning bolt moment. But I do think that, like, my love of gossip, if you will, like, there is something really applicable about that to kind of the telling the stories of young adults. And, that was stuff that I didn't just dismiss as like corny or dumb or, a stupid story about like so-and-so and their boyfriend drama. Like, I really became invested in those stories. I really cherished those stories. And I felt like, it all sort of lent itself well to my voice, or what my voice has become as a writer. So kind of trace it back all the way to that.
I love it. That's amazing. So talk to us about your writing style. How do you organize yourself as a writer? How do you keep track of your ideas, your inspirations, your characters, the whole process?
I'm like basically a big, like, do not do this,
Okay.
bulletin board. Well, how do I write? I think, like, I've discovered, people like to think there are two schools of thought on how you write. You're a plotter who outlines and sort of figures out the story and then sits down to write, or you're a pantser, which means you kind of feel your way through the story. You write by the seat of your pants. I have found that I am like a third category, which is basically Groundhog Day.
Okay.
I oftentimes get trapped in my story in the beginning, and it will take me months to free myself from the first chapter or the first two chapters. In fact, for Space Suite, I spent maybe 8 months of writing every day to get the first chapter right.
Wow.
It's not a good way to do it, but I'm sort of like, I try to do it different ways, but also like my process is my process, I guess. So I'm kind of leaning into it and just feeling like, you know what, if I'm messing around in the beginning, it's probably because I don't know something that I need to find out here. But yeah, that's how I write. And I also, to answer sort of the second part of your question, I love the word processing program Scrivener, which is, it allows you to kind of organize your writing in a three-dimensional way. You can, instead of just doing like a Microsoft Word document that runs from start to finish, you can kind of write scenes and view them almost as like index cards. So it's really easy to move things around and restructure things. They also have this really great feature where you can take a snapshot of a chapter, which basically saves a version of it. So I oftentimes will have like 15 different versions of a single chapter, and that way I can kind of organize them all at my fingertips rather than having 15 different Word documents.
Yeah.
So I really need to be pretty flexible about kind of how much rewriting I often do while I'm maybe doing a first draft, and Scrivener has certainly been a lifesaver for me in that way.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, big fan of Scrivener. And you can get a free trial online. So if you want to try it, I don't feel like I'll ever write a book without it.
I love it. So you actually have written a trilogy with Jenny Han. How difficult was it to write a book with another author?
Well, Jenny is my very best friend, and we have shared our writing with each other since grad school, long before either of us were published.
Gosh.
So I feel like, it's like it wasn't difficult because we really knew each other very intimately, and we were used to kind of critiquing each other and getting into each other's books. There's not a page of writing that Jenny has written in her entire career that I have not kind of read and give notes on, and vice versa. So we were kind of coming to the table with a working relationship that had been sort of time tested already. And it just ended up feeling kind of like an extension of that experience. we did chat like every single day, and we began to talk about the characters in Burn for Burn as if they were real people. Like we would sit down at dinner and just kind of start riffing on them about things they could do, or backstory, this and that. The books became truly an extension of our friendship. So it was a joyous experience. There was really very, very, very few kind of hiccups in that process. It was really terrific.
That's so awesome to hear, and I love it. I love there's a friendship that was started before, starting this journey, and then it is an extension to the journey.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think co-authoring is sort of like a thing now, and oftentimes it's like maybe people who have not shared work before, and they have this experience where they're just sort of like, it almost seems like a running writing exercise. Like, hey, Laura, like, let's write a book together. I'll write the first chapter and send it to you. And then you do one and send it back to me. And I don't know what you're going to write about. With Burn for Burn, it was so twisty. And we had a lot of kind of like reveals and, plot twists and stuff that we really sort of like developed an architecture for the series before we even got started. And we kind of both had to be involved in the creation of every chapter. So we were able to work really intimately with each other because we had that pre-existing relationship.
Amazing. So the Burn for Burn will be in the show notes. So if anyone's interested to check that out, yes, definitely it's going to be there. So
thank you.
Yeah. So now let's talk about your books. What's the favorite character you have written so far?
It's hard to pick a favorite. It's like my kids, like like I love them all for different reasons. But I guess I would say like it was really fun writing Amelia in my newest book, Stay Sweet, just because she's very sunny, she's an optimist, and but she also has like a lot of insecurities about her that I think I don't necessarily have in my own life. And so it was fun to kind of step outside of myself and try to write somebody who would not normally gravitate to a leadership role, or would not necessarily think to extend herself or kind of flex a muscle of leadership. And that was kind of really fun to imagine that girl.
Yeah, and Amelia was
throw her into positions where she had to do that to survive.
I know. I love the fact that you talk about not stepping into leadership, but yet Amelia had to step up.
Yeah. Those are the fun situations, like the imbalance of like, this is the thing that I'm kind of the worst at, and I'm going to throw you into a situation where you absolutely have to do that thing. So, that was a sort of fun chemistry.
So what inspired you to write Stay Sweet?
Stay Sweet came to me. I mean, there were a lot of things that inspired the book, like a lot of different articles I was reading kind of about teenagers today and like the difficulties they have, like especially girls kind of asserting themselves and being leaders. And, even something as like sort of benign as like expressing an opinion. I mean, there are girls who really struggle with expressing opinions to their friends because they don't want to be seen as sort of unlikable. And that kind of blew my mind to sort of start to recognize that this was a thing that was happening in the culture. Obviously, the election really kind of inspired the book, but truly the lightning bolt moment happened about 9 years ago. When I was on tour for my first book. I happened to visit a ice cream parlor in the middle of nowhere in Ohio that is very similar to Mead Creamery. And it was all girls who were working at this ice cream stand. And it was so crowded. It was like a beautiful hot summer day. The girls were adorable and they were working so hard in this really cramped space. It gave me a lot of like feelings in my heart, like seeing these girls kind of like busting their butts, but like definitely also having fun and taking pride in their work. And I was in the middle of paying for my ice cream cone when I noticed that in the back of the stand was a boy. who was definitely not working as hard as the other girls. In fact, he had his feet up on the desk and he was looking at his cell phone, and he had two oscillating fans pointed at his face. Just like king of the castle. And there was just something so bizarre about like that. I took my ice cream, I went and sat at the picnic table, and like the idea for this book just kind of started coming like popcorn, like popcorn in the popcorn machine, like just popping all of these ideas about this kind of funny situation. But it took me a long time to figure out like exactly what I wanted to do with that. But that was really, truly the genesis of the idea.
Got a question. Did you get a craving for ice cream as you wrote the book?
Oh my God. I put on like 15 pounds writing this book. No lie. Like, not only did I get cravings, but I felt like it was my duty, my responsibility as a writer to have ice cream like almost every day of working, every time I visited like a new town, I wanted to go to the ice cream place there. I wanted to go to like ice cream places big and small. Yes, I ate, and I even made, with my own ice cream maker, a ton of ice cream.
I was going to say, I was like, how did you come up with the recipes? What was the inspiration for the recipes?
I was so lucky. So here in Pittsburgh, there's two really well-known sort of independent ice cream makers. The first is a group of two women named Leonas, and they make ice cream sandwiches with really interesting flavors like orange blossom and, on a shortbread cookie, like really cool flavor combos. And then there's another place called Millie's, where they're more of like a straight ice cream parlor, but they also make really kind of inventive flavors like Vietnamese iced coffee ice cream that they have there is like my total favorite. But these two places were super nice about like inviting me in, letting me watch them make ice cream in like the same kind of commercial machine that Amelia uses in the book or has to learn on in the book. And they talked to me a lot about the chemistry. The Leonas girls in particular were graduates of a extremely rigorous ice cream program run out of Penn State University here in Pennsylvania. It's like harder than Harvard to like get through this ice cream program. So, I mean, in some ways, like, they're less sort of ice cream makers and more like chemists, and so they really think about like, what are things that go wrong when you make ice cream? What are things you can use to flavor ice cream that's not sugar? There's a secret that runs through the book of like a particular recipe at this ice cream stand. And, they really helped me work through, what that could be and how, that would work as an ice cream flavor.
Yeah, I was wondering. I was like, how did you come up with that recipe?
Yeah. It was all the help of, these very generous artists.
Love it. All for the sake of research. I love it. And all the ice cream for it.
Mm-hmm. It was so cool because like Millie's, I hired them. I had a big Pittsburgh kind of launch event here, and I hired them to come bring their ice cream truck and park it out front of the bookstore and give everyone free ice cream. It was really, they're really great people.
Oh, that's so nice. I love it. I love incorporating parts of the book into the real life. So
yeah, for sure.
So what has been the biggest aha moment writing this book?
The biggest what?
Aha moment writing this book.
Yeah, I had a big one. For, I would say, the first 3 drafts, the character of Grady was completely different. The best way I could pitch it to you is say that he was much more Trumpian. He was like a guy who came from extreme privilege, who really thought he knew better and operated with a lot of bravado, and also not a lot of respect for the girls who worked at the stand. And it really took a toll on the romance, because I had a hard time, though I think he was believable and ultimately became sympathetic as you kind of learned about his backstory, and as he kind of humbled himself to realize that he really wasn't good at these things. It just made it so much harder to bring Amelia around to him in a romantic way, because you just kind of dislike the guy. And even though he had his growing moment, it was really, that didn't necessarily mean you wanted to make out with him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I really had to work to temper him, to make him kind of still a bit in over his head, but always sort of respectful and, almost in awe of watching Amelia kind of bloom into, figuring out her passions and caring about this place and how successful or not it's going to be. And that for somebody like him, who's kind of been floating along without a real passion, to watch her experience that and to be a part of that up close, I mean, it's super hot. So he really changed a lot through the writing of the book, as I kind of softened him up and became, much more likable. Actually, on a practical level, one of the first moments in the book where that really changed was the scene where Amelia goes to the ice cream stand after, something kind of big happens in the book. And, in an earlier draft, I just kind of have her walking in and finding him behind the desk, kind of posturing. But, in the current draft of the book, in the final version, he's outside really taking care of some possessions, things that people have left at the stand. And it was like in that moment when I kind of allowed him to do that, then his character really began to change into, what is currently in the book.
Yeah, I love the fact that the romance was there, but it wasn't the main thing of the book. I felt like more coming of age, Amelia finding her passion, finding her voice, and finding her.
Honestly, Laura, that is the true romance of the book. That this girl falls in love with what it is she wants to do with the rest of her life, and everything else is just kind of like a cherry on top.
Yeah, like it was like, oh, it's nice. It's a cute romance in that way, but it wasn't like the main focus of the book. And that was what I wanted. Like it was about turns like, that I love my work. I love what I'm doing. And even the word of despair, we're like, where is this all going to work itself out? She still found her voice in that process.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I mean, to it's almost like that really allows her to even, be romantic, because she is kind of fully coming into her own. And, without that, I don't know that she would be open to anything or, really be able to sort of assert herself in terms of like what she wants or hopes for.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love this book. This was one of my favorite.
Thank you. I got this like feminist message always in my work, and this, I think, more than anything I've ever written before, it's just right there on the surface, and yet it still can be sunny, it still can be really, it has so much else going on, but really like the journey that Amelia goes through in the book is like, so near and dear to my heart, because it really mimics like how I found writing, and that things just kind of took off from there in a way that I never would have imagined possible.
I love it. Thank you for writing this book, and thank you for putting your thoughts and your beliefs there and sharing the story.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you enjoyed it, really.
I did. So now let's talk about books that influence your writing. So what type of books do you read?
I tend to read more adult fiction.
Okay.
Still with teenage protagonists, though. So, like, yeah, I just because, I mean, I do read a lot of YA, and I read all of my friends' books. but sometimes I just like to see kind of, I like to read outside of YA as well, just to kind of get more ideas and sort of see more possibilities about like ways that stories can be told. And it's, just trying to keep it fresh.
I love it. Who's your favorite author?
Hands down, my favorite author is Melissa Bank, who wrote The Girl's Guide to Hunting and Fishing.
I love that.
Is probably her. Yeah. And I had the pleasure of taking a writing workshop with her last summer as I was working on Stay Sweet. And it was just the most unbelievable experience. And I'm a huge, huge fan of her writing. And I feel like, it's sort of deceptively simple and just so clean and easy, but beautiful. And she's just one of the best for sure.
I love it. Yeah, I love that book. Actually, I read it a while ago. Maybe it's up for a reread.
Yeah, I read it. I read it probably, or I crack it, I would say, at least once a year.
I love it. Yeah. So, what's the last book you read?
I'm just about to finish a nonfiction book called, what's it called? White Fragility.
Oh, okay.
And it's all about sort of, not to get heavy on you, but it's all about kind of the defensiveness that like white people have right now when it comes to racism and sort of working to dismantle and sort of disarm white people so they are able to understand the racial complexities that are going on in the United States right now and become better advocates for people of color.
I love it.
So I'm really enjoying it, and I'm seeing a lot of things that really, just bringing a whole new level of understanding to kind of ways in which I might participate in that system unknowingly, and ways that I can sort of be a better advocate. And that's important to me, especially today. So,
yeah. Yeah, in today's climate, I think that's like so timely, to have that conversation and just to be present, to be aware of your own privilege, and then seeing be able to speak out to others.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us where we can find you online.
Well, if you can spell my first name, you can find me online pretty much everywhere at the handle Siobhan Vivian. So that's SIOBHAN, and last name is Vivian, like the girl's first name, VIVIAN. And to be honest, these days I'm most active, I think, on Instagram. I do pop in on Twitter every now and again, but Twitter's kind of changed, a little bit for me, and I don't necessarily enjoy the discourse there. So I've been on Instagram more, and that's a fun place to really share sort of your life and your writing and what you're working on. So that's where I'm at.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Siobhan, for agreeing to review. For showing us in the detailed list of book recommendations mentioned in this podcast, please go to whattoreadnextblog.com. If you would like to support this podcast, please consider a review in iTunes or on Apple Podcasts. It only takes 2 minutes and it will help this podcast get discovered by a new bookish audience. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a fantastic day.